Today I'm here to talk about our work on studying the world of tracking and advertising in the mobile ecosystem. Work done in collaboration with a lot of the institutions you see down there. Does this thing work? I don't think this is working. Okay. So from time to time, we see news articles about companies, third parties, collecting tracking data from mobile users, selling this data, sharing it with third parties, which gives us an idea about tracking going on in the mobile ecosystem, but we don't really see like a holistic picture. We don't really know what exactly is going on, who's doing what. And this isn't really helped by the fact that our apps are not really required to tell us which third parties they use to collect this information about us. Their privacy policies are sometimes vague, if they even exist in some cases. They don't really mention third parties in many cases. And this really doesn't leave users in a very good position because they don't really know much about these activities. And with many apps being free, in fact, most of them, they need to monetize using these services, using these third-party services that allow them to use advertising or tracking their users to monetize their apps. We call these services ATSs for short, advertising and tracking services, which in many cases are not really visible to the users. So the users don't really see a lot of these when they're deployed in their apps that they're using. As I said, the privacy policies aren't really known to the users either. If you don't know it's there, you don't really know the privacy policies. And it's very opaque to the users, which makes it not ideal for them. And this isn't really helped by the fact that we haven't really had, thus far, a very complete view of the mobile advertising and tracking ecosystem, and we haven't seen really, to the best of our knowledge, a holistic study of this system. So what we are trying to do is to bring transparency to the system and to the space. To do that, we define a set of questions to answer. First, we need to find out which domains are associated with these third-party services in the mobile space. Then we need to figure out which organizations own these services and operate them. From there, we want to see which of these are also present in the web space, so we can figure out if they're doing or they're capable of doing cross-device tracking. And then we want to find out what their privacy policies are, whether they allow data sharing between themselves and other third parties, whether they allow users to opt out or not. And to sort of, by answering these questions, we make it a little less opaque to the users what's going on in the mobile space. To start, we first tried using publicly available data sets, the low-hanging fruit. What do we have available to us to identify domains based on public lists? And turns out not a whole lot is really gained by looking at these lists, because a lot of them are focusing on the web platform. For a lot of, at least in this example, for a service, a well-known mobile tracking service like Flurry, what we get from some of these as a category is it's an internet service, or it's the same as something like Cloudflare, which provides a very different type of third-party service, being a cloud service provider. And in some cases, we don't really get any categorization at all, which is evident from stuff like EasyList, which is used by AdBlock Plus. So not really a whole lot available on mobile-specific trackers. So to answer the first question, we need to devise our own methods. So we need to have our own classifier to classify these domains. But first, before we do that, we need to first figure out which are the set of domains contacted by apps in the mobile space. We've already seen other methods such as static analysis and dynamic analysis using UI monkeys to exercise apps in lab settings, and as you may know, they are limited in their own ways. Some of them are not very scalable, such as in-lab testing. It doesn't really scale up. Some of them don't really reveal the actual code paths that applications take when you run them in real environments using real user stimuli. So what we do instead is we use our own Lumen dataset. Lumen is a privacy tool for Android that provides us with anonymized traffic logs from real users, thousands of real users using thousands of real apps, which reveals interactions between those apps and thousands of different domains with millions of flows. Lumen is available to download publicly from the Play Store, so you can go download it. It's supported by the NSF, Data Transparency Lab, and the European Union Horizon 2020 funding programs. So, using data that we get from Lumen, we know which apps are contacting which domains. We use that information to first identify third-party domains and distinguish them from first-party domains. We do that using a set of publicly available information that we have from the apps and the domains themselves, including TLS certificates, scraping the front pages, and a bunch of other stuff which I will get into shortly. After we distinguish first parties from third parties, we then need to identify third-party services that specifically focus on providing advertising or tracking services as their main business model from other types of third-party services such as cloud providers or weather information providers. So the way we do this is we look at different interactions that apps have with different domains. In this case, you see 4 apps on the top and 4 domains at the bottom in the blue boxes. And based on, well, first of all, we look at publicly available information that we have from these domains. We have their TLS certificates, which will tell us the organization that owns the domain. We have information from the app stores about the apps that will tell us who developed the apps. And that will give us an idea of whether a domain might be a third party for an application. And then we use other information such as which apps contacted which domains. So if a domain is contacted by more than one application from different developers, it might be a third party to those apps. Whereas in the case of an app like AccuWeather, AccuWeather.com is actually a first party to the AccuWeather app, whereas it's a third party to the HTC Sense app, as is evident in this example. And then we use after we identify the third parties, we use a machine learning algorithm that looks at information we scrape from the web, from search engines, from TLS certificates about each domain, and it essentially identifies those domains that are specifically used for advertising and tracking, as I said, as opposed to other types of third-party services. The results of this method are that out of the 40,000 domains that we studied, we found 2,000 third-party domains that are whose main purpose is to provide advertising and tracking services. And then we found an additional 730 domains who are capable of providing these services, but whose main business model doesn't involve advertising and tracking. We call these ATS capable domains. And as you can see here, using the results that we now have, we can see that publicly available lists are sort of lacking in this department because they don't really focus on domains that are active in the mobile space, with very poor coverage with some of the lists. So far, we have uncovered the domains that are involved in these activities, but we don't really know about companies who are operating these services. So who are these people? Who owns these services? This is essentially where the data ends up, right? So we need to know more about these players. So we use, again, information available about the domains, and we combine it with other publicly available data sets, such as D&B Hoover's database or Crunchbase, to find out the parent organizations for each domain. It's, again, a different automated algorithm to identify these services, to identify the parent companies of these services. And the results that we find is that about 300 companies run the majority of these services, close to 2,000 ATSs. And again, as expected, Google is the largest player in this space with its various services present in more than 73% of the apps that we looked at. That is not really surprising. What might be a little bit surprising is some company like Verizon, having so much market share in the ecosystem, which we find is due to high-cost acquisitions of other companies who are very well known and very active in this space. So Verizon acquired Yahoo, which owned Flory. Flory is a very big tracker in this space, and therefore Verizon gained a lot of market share. There are other examples such as Adobe and other companies that have also done this. Google itself and Alphabet as a parent company itself has also acquired a service called Crashlytics, which was, again, one of the largest analytics services in the mobile ecosystem, and thus increasing its market share. So far we've looked at the domains associated with the services, the companies who are running these services and who own the services. Now we want to know if these same services are also present in popular websites. We want to know if they're capable of performing cross-device tracking. And the way we do this is we scrape the top 1,000 Alexa websites and look for the presence of these domains. And in doing so, we found that out of the top 20 parent organizations, 15 of them are also present in the web ecosystem, which would suggest that they can also perform cross-device tracking of the users, which isn't really known to a lot of the users. As I said, they don't really provide any visual clues when they're inside your apps, and most of them don't really provide any sort of clues when they're present on the web. So it's interesting to note that. Now, we want to look at the privacy policies of the companies that run these services to see how data sharing policies work, if they allow sharing of data or if they say themselves that they allow for data sharing, whether they allow users to opt out of tracking or using their tracking data for different purposes, and where that leaves the users. So looking at the policies, the privacy policies of the top 10 companies in the space, we see that the majority of them have an ad subsidiary within the same company with whom they allow intra-organizational data sharing. So if you are using an analytics service provided by one of these companies, the data collected for analytics purposes is allowed to be shared with an advertising subsidiary within the same company, even though the original intent of the data collection might not have been for targeted advertisements. And also, we have 8 out of 10 of these companies who allow data sharing with their third-party partners, which is, again, interesting, depending on whether they also have like ad subsidiaries or not. So they might not allow that, but they will allow data sharing with third parties. So either way, data sharing is allowed with at least one party aside from the original one. As for opting out, none of these companies really allow users to opt out of tracking data collection overall, but they do allow you to sometimes ask for them to stop using tracking data for targeted advertisements, but we find that that is not really uniform across different companies, and sometimes it's not very intuitive. One of them just has an email address somewhere that says send an email to us and we'll consider it, which isn't really helpful. As an extra bonus point here, I want to quickly mention that we looked at the flow of the tracking data across borders, specifically in this case, flow of data flows that contain unique identifiers from countries in the European Union, and we found that close to 90% of those end up in the United States, with 4% ending up in China, and then the rest in other countries, which makes it interesting because there are upcoming directives, the e-privacy directive and the GDPR, that will be enacted this year and will go into effect this year, which will make it perhaps challenging to monitor and enforce these regulations, given that so much tracking data is flowing across borders. We also look at the how Children's Online Privacy Protection Act in the United States applies to some of the apps that we've studied. I invite you to read the paper for details about that. We also have an upcoming paper to be published in PETS this year that goes into detail about that. So in summary, we set about answering these four questions. And in doing so, we developed methods to identify third-party services. We've developed a method to distinguish between advertising and tracking services and other types of third parties. We developed an automated method to find out who the parent organizations of these services are, and we also looked at their presence in the web space. We also looked at and inspected their privacy policies of the top companies to reveal their data sharing policies and their opting out policies. And with that, I would be happy to take questions from the audience.
Hi, very interesting work. Is the list of your domains that ATSs use and their classification, are you planning to make that data available?
Right now, it's not available publicly, but we do plan on releasing the data set at some point in the future.
Okay, we'll be able to send you a message.
Thank you.
Hi, nice work. So since none of these services like Google, Facebook, or Verizon, they allow users to opt out of tracking. So what is like the difficulty when you actually detect these kind of like tracking services? So why don't you actually go ahead and block them? So what are like the challenges in the mobile ecosystem that we don't have equivalents of Ghostry or Privacy Badger, which are very successful tools which operate in the desktop environment, but don't have their equivalent in the mobile ecosystem?
So as I mentioned, we use data from Lumen. We actually developed Lumen. And Lumen, the upcoming release of Lumen will allow you to block flows based on information that we provide to you on the app itself. So we are providing that tool as well. We are aware that users, now that we give them this knowledge about these activities, will want to have a choice. And we are aiming to provide them with that choice with the upcoming release of Lumen.
Thank you.
Awesome work. I just had a quick question. You mentioned, GDPR. I was wondering if you were able to sort of identify violations of the, hashtag GDPR.
We can't really, as we're not really lawyers, we can't really say anything specifically, like this app is for sure violating the GDPR. We're just highlighting that given that the data is flowing across borders, it's going to be challenging to enforce those. But whether they're actually violating the law or not, I don't think we're in a very good position to make comments about that.
Right. Thanks.
Other questions for Abbas? If not, let's thank Abbas one more time.